officially recording and going for our first ever online Bible study. So here we go. Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is, of course, the first book in the New Testament, but that is who is Matthew. Matthew is actually one of the few disciples of Jesus, one of the few apostles who actually wrote. Others didn't actually write anything, so but Matthew did. So it's kind of a unique gospel, almost a direct eyewitness account to various events. He does record some things that he wasn't participating at. So the book of Matthew is he was part of the Levitical order, which of course he did temple type duties. I'm gonna throw that because, as we all know, Matthew was a tax collector. As being a tax collector, well, the rest of the family might not want him going to the temple. If your tax collectors were considered to be sinful folks, traitors to the people, and all sorts of fun things like that. But he was, because he's recorded as Levite, as a part of the hereditary order of temple priests, somewhat similar to Zachariah. If you remember, Zachariah, he was the baptizer's dad. John's dad, Zachariah, was off in his priestly thing when he found out John was conceived, and well, he beta testing, and I'm trying to figure out if, as the cut on mic symbol comes up, if you guys are trying to talk. So if you're trying to talk, and I'm not, please use the chat function to let me know so we can see if we can work out bugs here. So, get back to Matthew. So what we know is chapter 8, and he was also one of the 12 original apostles. So he's a guy who got Jesus. You got to walk with him, got to listen to him, got to other apostles. And a unique perspective amongst the Gospels, because, of course, was written by somebody who knew an apostle, not so much a direct witness. Luke, of course, makes no bones about being the fact that he did research. He indicated what others had written, what eyewitnesses said, and whatnot. John, of course, just was also an apostle, but he just kind of did his own thing with the gospel. So that's why we put Matthew, Mark, and Luke in one, John, and then another column. So, and so what he was trying to do, who is he writing to? And these are some of the questions any scholar is asking. Who did he write to? In our sense, the gospel as a piece of literature is not like a letter who tells who they're writing to. And nice thing about Paul, we always told us, who am I writing to? So, but he doesn't. So what of his audience is kind of in from his text. So his audience is the people you're with the Old Testament. Possibly people of Jewish descent, can't spell, please forgive me. People who were converts, people who were not only Jewish, they didn't have Jewish parents, but they converted to Judaism at some point in their life and spent some time in the Old Testament text. And we suspect that is because as we go through the Gospel of Matthew, he's going to be doing a lot of this thing like, and this who fulfills the prophecy, or in accordance with what the prophet said. You see that at several points through the Gospel of Matthew. So there's a lot of folks to suspect. Originally, his audience was going to be people of Jewish descent or people who converted to Judaism. Actually, it doesn't matter overly much outside of it. Just kind of set context of the book and create an idea of what he's trying to accomplish with this gospel. Because the writer, he has a goal in mind. So to remain on task, it does kind of help to make sure we're keeping his goals in mind. So basically, he was talking to people least familiar with the Old Testament, particularly the prophecies. Now, really, what I would say the end-all, be-all of Matthew. So, if we're wrong, it doesn't really matter in the end because we've got the text in front of us and we can read the text. And we try to keep in mind his narrative. We'll do it and try to figure out what Matthew's trying to accomplish because he does stick to his narrative. Now, what you may come across in your studies of the Bible is there's a big debate within academic circles about the order of the Gospels. Most of it is just a little garbage, not worth paying much attention to. A lot of this is coming out of the fact that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar in their layouts. They're very similar in the way they tell the story. They're similar in what they include in their stories. And in those similarities, they picked up on them. They said, well, hey, they must be completely related. So maybe they are each other, or maybe they have a common source. There's sorts of ideas that are floating out around there. What the most popular be that Mark was the first gospel, and then Matthew and Luke both from Mark and expanded on what he wrote. And to be honest, we're not really too sure about that. So, yeah, take it well. The thought is that there is this mysterious document called the Q document. And Q, the antagonist from Star Trek. Except I think there's more proof that that Q exists in this mystery document or documents called Q. Matter in the end, likely the answer is no. Say Luke was pretty upfront and honest and said, hey, I did some research, guys. I went and looked at what other people were writing. I went and took eyewitnesses, so no big deal. Here's the problem. Theory has to be falsifiable. You can't buy it because there's no evidence one way or another that Q ever existed. So, about that. The idea we're going to go with is Matthew, probably the first book Bible written. Actually, let me rephrase it. One of the New Testament books written. Beat them to the punch. Some of Paul's letters are fairly older than the Gospel of Matthew. We're talking about 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, depending on how you want to date things. Letter appeared around 40, 45 AD. So we're talking pretty soon after the mission happened and all the disciples were out all over the place. Judging by Luke's comments that he had investigated other gospel reports, we are going to say that, also because the timeline for Luke's writing, I put in there because he also wrote the book called Acts, and he was a contemporary of Paul. He chose Paul. In fact, it's kind of fun to read the book of Acts. As you can through the book of Acts, you're going to notice that Luke is speaking in third person, to all of a sudden he's speaking in first person plural. So you have the moment almost that Luke joined up with Paul in Paul's missionary travel, detailing a historic account of what's happening with the different apostles during that time. We see of when he was actually writing. It looks like he finished up his reading around 62, between 2 and 65 AD. Was doing research and he was investigating other documents. That gives us a pretty good idea that Matthew wrote the Gospel around 50 to 80. This is important to note because one of the popular criticisms of Christianity is the idea that the Gospels were not written until around 1 to 150 AD. Scholars and skeptics to try and draw some onto the Gospel and their authenticity by saying, well, they're written after Jesus died and all that kind of stuff. So things had to have changed. And, well, we lost them because of that. Evidence just a far recording date with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all somewhere between 50 and 65 AD. Still reasonably close to the events they're recording. So they have a chance to talk to eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses would also have a chance to refute them. So we showing for us. Also, archaeological evidence has been the dates for various books of the Bible earlier in the history of the church. We got some fragments, according to carbon dating of, I think one of the from the Book of Galatians, it puts this right around 60 AD, Galatians we think was written pretty close to 40 AD. So we have some archaeological evidence that these things were written pretty early on in the history of the church. So a lot of literature has been kind of thrown out. They kind of missed the boat. What happened is they operated without evidence. A lot of the scholarship is the result of the Enlightenment movement of the 1800s. Full of themselves, they thought they were really smart. They thought that they knew these things, and well, when you don't have anything you want, it sounds smart. But when the end comes along, you're going to look pretty stupid. Archaeology has been the Bible's best friend. Stuff has been verified through separate means. People completely dependent of the Christian church. So that comes from all the various actual fragments and all that kind of good stuff that the various archaeologists find again in the Mediterranean. So awesome. Bible study, we're going to say, hey, Matthew wrote this gospel around 50 to 50 AD, so really close to the events and giving them a weight of authenticity. To the whole mess, the various gospels and their similarities, as I said, folks, similarities, and they couldn't help but compare them. As you go, you find various that are going to plot out the similarities of various gospels and not. Be very looking at those similarities, and as we're noticing differences, we're careful to allow the individual gospel speak about the individual gospel. One of the people notice discrepancies in the Gospels, differences in the Gospels, and they try to say, well, they got mistakes in them. The problem is the individual Gospels speak according to the individual Gospel. Remember, what is the story the Gospel writer is trying to tell? A Bible study, we're actually going to be spending our time with Matthew. We're not going to be spending a whole lot of time looking with, well, this is what Matthew recorded about this event, but this is what Matt had to say, and this is what Mark had to say, and well, we didn't say anything about this, or Mark didn't say anything about this. We're going to read each gospel as its own individual narrative, it's its own individual story, trying to its own individual point. So his own individual points he's trying to make, and so the narrative that he is communicating is going to try and build upon those points. So we're going to deal with Matthew. We're not going to worry about the other Gospels. For the purpose of our Bible study, we're going to say those Gospels don't exist. Weird. They still are going to ignore them in their entirety, but we're staying with Matthew's narrative and not breaking up his narrative, not destroying the points that he's trying to get across. We're not going to spend our time worrying about what Mark, Luke, and John are talking about. We're going to worry because it kind of makes sense. We're talking about Matthew. So, of his big focuses is that a continuity Testament. as noted earlier, and this was to fulfill the prophecy time and time again. So he's really to bring out is the fact that Jesus is the fulfillment of prophecy. So that's a really big thing, Matthew. It's also to help us to understand some of these prophecies. So as we're going along, be prepared to jump back to the various Old Testament accounts because they play a big role in understanding Matthew's point. They're citing these guys. We got to actually go back and say, hey, this is important. Let's go back. Let's look at. Let's see what the prophecy says. Other completely missed meanings within the text of Matthew. So we'll be throughout the course of this Bible study. So I'm hoping, even though those of you who are via the internet are wrong, that you do have your Bibles with you, or at least access to a online Bible program that you can quickly look things up and follow along with. Program a little bit better, I might try throwing up the various text on the screen, but until that, let's think, and flip through our books. So, all right. Matthew is word an extension of the Old Testament testimony. This is actually part of the reason why we put Matthew at the front of the New Testament, because he does such a great bridge between the Old Testament and the testimony of the New Testament. He really helps link the two together. All stuff. So we have his narrative, which brings out the ideas of the Old Testament. It really does help us draw the two together. So, and as he's looking at Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament, of several themes go, and they're going to come out throughout his stuff. And the biggest theme, Matthew, the idea of the reign of heaven. You're going to be hearing me go out of what most Bibles translate the phrase as. Time you're going to be reading through your translation, your Bibles, and most of them don't use that nice word reign. They actually use the word kingdom. Biggest fan of the translation, the word the kingdom. Meaning, like take their major thought. When they think kingdom, thinking of a physical place, of a map with geography and borders. They, at least with what Matthew is trying to communicate. The Greek talk, Greek basilus. Basilus actually is a verb. It's based off a verb, the verb to reign. Basileus. Basileus means to reign. It means what does the king do? And the Basileus is where the king does his thing. And what do kings do? They reign. So, better translation to say reign of heaven. Because when you get into the various things that Jesus is doing, they're actually action things. They're describing an action. The reign of heaven is going to be like a sower going out into the field and casting seeds around. The heaven is going to be like a man who throws this and invites all these people to be like some virgins waiting the bridegroom to come through. Things like action statements. So the idea of reigning, is going to be a bit more accurate in conveying what Matthew is trying to talk about. He's basically trying to tell us what is the action of heaven, what is the action of God, what is God trying to do, and lose that when we start talking kingdom language. Because then we're thinking in terms of that physical place, not as what God is attempting to do. And if you go place, you're going to lose the meaning of the parables. Seriously. And if you start losing the meaning of the parables, you're going to lose what Matthew is going to communicate. So we're going to talk of heaven. We're not talking kingdom. So bear with that. If you want to, feel free. This is one of those times I'm going to say, feel free to go through, mark up your text, scratch a word, and write another word in there. If you see kingdom of heaven in your Bible, just go ahead, mark it out, say reign of heaven. Let's help ourselves remember that idea of God acting, not a physical place. Part of the theme of the reign of heaven, figure out where my cursor went. All right. I'll get this idea of fulfillment. Back to fulfilling the Old Testament. So enough on a theme that we're already been talking about. No big deal here. Take place in a couple of ways. And we're going to really quick. I'm noticing I'm short on time. Here again next week too, so I'm not going to do anything new after this. With the idea of fulfillment, we're going to see it happen in two different ways. Camera with me holding my hand with two fingers. The obvious way is going to be Matthew say, and this was to fulfill what the prophet wrote. What we're going to see is that how the timeline progresses, the actions that Matthew tends to record Jesus doing, to mirror what happened to Israel in the Old Testament. So we have things like in the Holy Land, he's in the Promised Land, he's in the land that Abraham was supposed to get, and all of a sudden he's heading to Egypt. And then back to Egypt. That's what happened with Israel, where Israel's people were living in the Promised Land area. With the story of Joseph and in Joseph in the technical green coat, we're talking the real Joseph, the one who did have a multicultural colored cloak, but lost it as his brothers sold him into slavery, and became the right hand to Pharaoh. And ended up bringing his family down into the land of Goshen, where falling under the Egyptians' thumb and were put into slavery, and eventually led them out in the Exodus. So we have happening with Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. As a little boy is whisked away into Egypt and comes back. Twofold mirroring, actually, in this one, because we'll see when we get to that point. Matthew quotes a prophet saying that this was to fulfill prophecy. At the same time, we cannot help but see that this also is mirroring what is happening to the Old Testament. This is going into the theme of Matthew of establishing Jesus as fulfillment, that his fulfillment is also a part of the reign of heaven. It's part of the action of heaven. It's what God is trying to do. Okay, to introduce anything new, I'm going to stop here. Feel free to ask any questions before I log out. And we'll with the major themes of Matthew next week. Be competing with Bob Herringer for length of class. So we might be plotting a little slowly, but hey, that's good. It means we can get into a lot of depth. So, if questions? Yes. All right, go ahead and call it. I hopefully successfully recorded this, and as soon as I have it in a watchable form, we will have it uploaded to our church servers, and we'll be go. All right, thanks for the spell rain in Greek. Yeah, good, John. To you on that one because I don't actually have my Greek text on me. So I next week during class, hopefully the whiteboard. Okay, there are actually Phil asks, my Bible states that the book was written 60 to 65 BC. Thoughts? There are a couple different schools of thought, and this one is reflecting one of those schools of thought. They have a fairly view of the book in that they're dating it 60 to 65 BC, but at the same time, they are incorporating some of those theories that I talked about that Matthew borrowed from, say, Mark, and or from the Q document. So, as far as go, whatever, in my thoughts. We need it to be an inspired text, and, well, dating is not inspired. So we're not overly worried about the dating outside of what we're actually finding physically, and physically it's pushing that date earlier and earlier. I'm going with is the dating that can be found in Gibbs' commentary on the. If you watch the video later, you'll actually see me holding up the book. So I on me. And Gibbs is one of the best Matthew scholars out there right now. So I'm going with his frame of thought that 50, 55 AD would be correct. So that's where we go with that. Fill in your Bible some explanation as to where they went with those dates. So check those out and understand that some of this is coming from various scholarly theories, and in the end probably don't actually mean much in the great grand scheme of it. So I'm not going to die on a hill about so. All right, so we're going to call this a wrap and see you next week. Same time, same channel, and hopefully we won't get the link wrong again on the website. So catch up.